Hi guys, good day everyone. It's great to be on an exceptional with Sam again. This time we are having some amazing guy in the house. We always try to get the best around the world to bring them down here to talk about things that they've done and how the audience can learn new things about business, startup, entrepreneurship, and all of that. Mark is a very good friend in the house. Mark is the partner of DreamVC, where Mark tried to build more capacity for VC around the world. He's staying in Russia, staying in the UK, he's everywhere. He's also in Africa, making amazing impact in the VC world. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Samuel. Great to be here.
Welcome, Mike. Yes. Mike, quick one. Can you tell us about yourself? People want to know who is Mike. They've been looking out to say, oh, who's this great VC guy?
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity, Samuel. So yeah, I have a background that really stems across a couple of countries. I was actually born in Russia and lived in the Ukraine and in Russia for a while before moving over to Europe. And in the last few years of my career has really been focused around the African startup scene and the African investment world as well, though I have previously spent several years jumping between venture capital firms all over the world. Now, my background's been at some points an entrepreneur, at some points an operator, at some points an investor. But now my core focus at DreamVC is really to make sure that we can get as many new investors into the door who are actually focused on enabling and building the African startup ecosystems across all 54 markets of the continent.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's actually a fantastic combination. When you have been an operator, at the same time you have been the VC side, and you have knowledge from the two side. Quick one. I'm gonna start rolling down the question. First of all, I think can you explain what VC in a short form for people to get what VC is all about?
Sure. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the idea of investing, the idea that you give money from a person A to a person B, and that this money will somehow be worth more over time. You might think that investment is something like buying a house, where you buy an asset and then you have this asset, your house, for a period of time. It has a certain amount of value, and if the house is in greater demand, if people value this house, then the value of the house will also rise over time. Now, venture capital is somewhat similar. The space only exists, however, since about the 1950s or the 1960s. And if we're talking about the African markets, it's really existing since about 2005 to 2010. Why? Because the space is essentially one which specifically funds very high risk ventures which want to disrupt a very, very high risk space. So, how is it different from any other investment space? It's that you have somebody who's an investment professional who is investing in startups, particular form of business that wants to go and disrupt a huge market, rebuild the entire logistics industry, rebuild the entire finance space, rebuild the entire educational space. And if they want to do that, they can't just grow like a normal small business, a medium sized business, or even a large corporate. Instead, they must grow exponentially fast to do so. And that's where venture capital comes in. VC provides the funding, the capital, as well as the experience and the building ability to help those startups really accelerate from 0 to 100. And that's what the VC industry is really all about across the world.
Wow, wow, that's really amazing, amazing. Quick one. What's the basic difference? Because we know we have angel investor, we have VC. Are they all the same thing?
No, I mean, I know that there's a general misconception around that, but actually, an angel investor and a VC are just two parts of the venture capital ecosystem. VCs and the whole venture capital space was really born as part of something called the innovation economy. Everything all the way from when someone has an idea to when you have a giant business. And in that process, angels and VCs both play their own roles. For example, let's imagine we think of a company we all know, Meta, formerly Facebook. A company like that, to be formed and to grow to its current stage, needed to raise venture capital funding. But before it could even reach those venture capitalists, it needed to prove that it had done something. VCs only invest in about 0.05% of startups, and startups only account for about 1 of 10 or 100 companies. So we're talking about funding going to 1 of every 100,000 companies out there. Now, what does that mean? That means that to get to that stage, you need to first get funding from somewhere else. And are you going to go to a bank who are going to tell you, well, you have a new business, why would we give you money when you have no collateral? Are you going to go to family and friends? Well, maybe you don't have family and friends. or rich uncle who can give you that $10,000 to build out your first prototype or your first business. That's where an angel investor comes in. An angel investor is essentially somebody who comes in to support a very, very early stage business with critical funding that enables it to grow fast enough so then it either matures into a small business that can survive on its own or goes on to raise venture capital funding, which is that more substantial investment to actually scale into a huge company. Sometimes angels invest alongside VCs, but most of the time, they're the first people taking the biggest risk on a potential startup, but also the people that benefit the most if that startup does really, really well.
Great, great. That's amazing. That's amazing. I really want to ask you a lot about that, but I want to ask you something very quickly. You have operated in Europe, you've operated virtually every market space, and now you're operating in African market. What are the major observation about Africa regarding to VC? What are the major observation about Africa regarding to VC, and second regarding to funding, early
Mm-hmm.
stage funding?
Yeah. I mean, I think the potential when we talk about any markets around the world, any country of the 200 or so countries around the world, the potential specifically among the 54 markets on the African continent is almost limitless because historically, traditionally, for many, many years, many markets have been underfunded, undersupported, or overlooked. That is just the general trend and the general environment that most entrepreneurs and potential funders face when they're moving into the investment space anywhere on the continent right now. And that's probably the one unifying thing that brings together all of the 54 markets, otherwise, completely different markets in their own right. Now, I think the landscape for VC investment in particular is even more nuanced. So, if for those of you who might be listening to the news, you might have heard that this year, startups across the African startup scene raised upwards of $5 billion in venture capital funding. That might seem like a really, really huge amount. But once you then look at New York or you look at Silicon Valley, you look at big cities in China or in Europe or the UK, you'll realize that for some of those cities, just cities, that is an amount that they raise every few months. So then when you realize that this is the amount that goes to the entire startup ecosystem for the African continent, which is many times larger than the United States, many times larger than Europe or China in their own right, right? Then we're talking about a market that has not reached even 1% of its potential in terms of startup funding. And that's kind of the wider environment. Now, there's a whole range of trends we can talk about there, but I think the underlying one is that there's a couple of reasons why most people aren't exposed. Historically, the VC industry has not made any effort to include people in it. It's always had a reputation of something that's been a bit elitist, that's been oriented out of the US or oriented out of a particular very well capitalized hub. So many people think that VC is just for the billionaires out there, the millionaires out there, or individuals who might have come from many generational, multi generational wealth. But actually, that's not the case. The VC ecosystem began as provision of funds for those crazy entrepreneurs out there who really want to disrupt the world. And because the entrepreneur is taking such a huge risk, so is the VC. And both of these parties must be aligned, and both of these entities or both these environments in the innovation economy must be, very accessible for people to plug into if we want to build like a really, really strong private capital market. And I think that is what every individual, every working professional across the African continent and elsewhere around the world really wants. So just, I guess, realizing that and plugging into those opportunities, that's, what I really hope is going to happen in the next few years.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. You see, I think one thing I realized that in African market there's still a lot of knowledge gap when it comes to VC. People don't know in the VC world that there's a part where the legal plays professional plays in. There's a part where the financial expert plays in. There's a whole lot of people or professionals that play in this space. But what I realized from the little program that we did in Road African Startup, when we led to sign agreement with some of our partners and all of that, they naturally go to lawyers who know nothing about VC, about investment, about partnership, and about save notes and all of these documents to review this document, and it's sometimes very difficult to understand. You now becomes a lecturer eventually. So what I want to ask you, what was your observation about the knowledge of the practitioners that are supposed to be part of this? And what do you think can be done to create more awareness about activities that have to do with VC? Because if people don't have enough understanding about what VC or angel investor or investment, all this in all about this terminology, they cannot even participate in it. They need to understand how this thing works and the advantage. So what I want to ask you is that what are your observation of the related with African professional within the space, and how do you think we can improve the awareness in this space?
Well, thank you, Sam. I think that you've really hit the question, the nail on the head, the elephant in the room in this sense. So I think there's a couple of things there. So firstly, you mentioned, what is happening with the wider working professional, whether that's in Lagos or in Kigali, in Nairobi, or in Cape Town, really across the continent. And I think the general scenario, what's happening is that most of them are entirely unexposed, entirely unconnected to the startup space or the investment space. Remember that, as I mentioned, the VC space is supposed to power the startups that are in this market. They're supposed to work hand in hand to plug in together to build the startup ecosystem. What's happened instead is that a lot of people, a generation, if not 2 or 3 generations now, of professionals across the continent have figured out that entrepreneurship is the way forward to build a private sector. And they've taken that step in engaging in building their own ventures and taking that risk. But the investment industry, the kind of wealth holders or working professionals who might sit on the other side, who might want to plug in to support these taking these risks, haven't done so. So what that means now is we have thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs in each of the 54 markets who are building and taking that risk and are at the stage where they need venture capital funding to take the next step. They need those angels at the early stage and they need the VCs to follow up. But unfortunately, the vast majority of the VCs that exist are very small. They're very far from each other. Quite often, they're not interconnected, and most of the larger players are not African based or African focused, with a very large number of top funds investing in African startups being actually those based in China, based in the UK, based in the US, or based, for example, in France. That still means that there's money going to those ecosystems, but it's not as good as it would be if we had a lot more investors at the table, because this means that when, for example, a startup like Flutterwave, a startup like OPay, a startup like Swivel does amazingly and grows a lot and makes a lot of money for their investors, that investor is not necessarily going to put that money back into the startup ecosystem in Egypt, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Kenya, in Tanzania, anywhere else across the continent. So that's not generating as much of a multiplier effect for those startups as it could be. And I guess what we can do about that is we can, one, democratize access to that knowledge. We can talk more about VC. We can enable more people to understand more about how to work with the VC space. But more actively and more proactively, we must get more people to realize that the investment space isn't one that has a huge barrier to join it. Just like how entrepreneurship is a space that requires a lot of grit for people to get into, it's very much similar on the investor side. And what's happening there is that there are organizations like, for example, DreamVC, that are taking that first step by making it easy for people to learn about what venture capital is, how one can work in VC, and how one can do so with an African context, doing so in Nigeria, doing so in Ghana, and Ethiopia, and Kenya, in markets that historically have not been exposed to the Silicon Valley or the London-based ecosystems, for example, but which nonetheless have an even larger number of entrepreneurs that need that funding and have now 2, 3 generations of people that could be providing that funding, but just don't know how to or don't know how to take those first steps. So if we can engage all this generational wealth, if we can engage people to start thinking about startups as an option, as something they can actually support, then the potential there is limitless. And the numbers that we're hearing now in the news, this $5 billion in funding, is just a grain of sand compared to the potential that could be unlocked within each of these markets.
Okay, great, great. That's amazing. I think we have to do more of this. Okay, great. That's amazing. Okay, I before we go into another thing I want to ask about is that There are some early documents that people signing. Some people want to go through signing safe document. First of all, I want to know what safe document are. And secondly, I want us to talk about what are convertible notes or what are notes in general and what makes them similar. What makes them similar or what is the advantage of the one over the other?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here. So when you say like people sign a document, I think what Samuel's getting at is that when you're actually fundraising isn't the end of the game. It's very much the start of the process of a very long business relationship. When you're fundraising for your startup from a venture capital investor, they're getting involved in working with you and owning a portion of your firm and affecting your decision making for the next 3, 5, or maybe 10 years. And as a process of that, there's a whole range of legal documentation that gets signed. Now, one of the traditional instruments or so called documents that facilitate that investment process is called a SAFE. A SAFE is a simple agreement for future equity. It's something that was pioneered by YC about 10 years back, and it's really grown into an instrument of its own right. So the safe in its own way has made it much easier for people to actually invest without having access to amazing lawyers, by giving you a predefined document with some predefined options where you can just customize the terms and make that investment. Convertible note is a bit different. So convertible note is essentially almost like a mix of a equity form of financing where you're purchasing equity or ownership of a company, and debt form of financing where you're purchasing debt or an obligation from the company. Now, a safe and a convertible note fundamentally are very similar because both of them are instruments used for an investment in a startup, right? So you as an investor would take either of these, you would give a startup a conditional investment using this as an instrument. Where the difference really comes up is that the safe note has a predefined method of conversion. For example, a safe note can come in multiple different ways, but the most common ones are one where you have a discount or you have a valuation cap, and we can discuss those in a second. Whereas a convertible note gives you an option of conversion. It gives you various conversion terms, which means that the investor and the founder have more optionality of what happens as the business grows. Let's imagine in one case, the investor would prefer to be paid back and not own equity in the company. That's possible. Or they might prefer to own equity in the company and have the debt that they own convert, hence the convertible note. So that flexibility that the convertible note gives you is kind of missing from the safe, which is very much an equity investment. It's just an equity investment happening in the future. But yeah, we can dive into those details and more if you'd like.
Hello, are you still there?
Yep, yep, yep.
Hello, Mike.
Are we back?
Okay, Mike, great, Mike. Great. So, another thing I want to ask you is if what do you see the advantage of going the route of debt initially before going into equity funding? What do you,
Mhm.
what's your understanding? Do you see anything wrong in because a lot of people in Africa here, especially, what would you? A lot of them go through the route of debt before they eventually go into equity round. What do you think about that?
Are we asking from the entrepreneur or the investor's perspective?
Yeah, they go into to get the debt funding before they go into the equity round to create their first set of cash flow.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
Okay, so from an entrepreneur's background, yeah. So for entrepreneurs, there's a certain advantage in accessing debt. So debt quite often can be easier to access than equity funding. Why? It's because of that earlier mentioned scenario where right now the number of angels on the continent is still very, very low, and the number of investors on the continent who are capable of making equity investments is still very, very low. So accessing debt can be easier. Debt comes with both
Hello?
advantages and disadvantages. So, for example, one advantage of debt is that this means that you have money coming into the doors without additional pressure on obligations that you might have before your equity investors. where while an equity investor is buying ownership in your company and so a decision-making role in the management of how your company is run, that's the VC. A debt investor is essentially saying, similar to a bank, that here is a loan, we're purchasing a certain obligation, and then as your company grows, and you'll pay us back this money, but you'll retain ownership in your company, right? So there's a certain advantage there of not selling up ownership in your company and still having cash straight away for actually running operations, right? So I guess that's the kind of biggest difference that I would point out between the equity investment and the debt investment. Hope that's helpful.
Hello, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Samuel?
Hello, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Samuel. Can you hear me? Samuel? Can you hear me? Seems like we're losing Samuel there. Let's give it a moment.
Getting back online. Okay, welcome back. Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you again. Can you hear
Can
me
you
now?
hear me? I think there are two devices connected. Let me check. Okay, Mike. Well done. So let's quickly let's round up. We're having some issue with the internet and all that. So, Mike, please, can you tell us about Dream VC? Uh, you've been working in Dream VC for a while. Can you tell us about Dream VC and how could Dream VC be helpful to Africa?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think our mission very much is one that's enabling, right? It's an infrastructure play, and I think that's the core aspect I would take. I don't think Africa needs help. I think it needs access and the people who have that ability to actually help themselves. So DreamVC is very much the infrastructure player in that investor space. We see ourselves as an investor accelerator or almost like a community-driven educational platform, right? And we provide these remote programs where we essentially enable individuals, working professionals, operators, entrepreneurs, and others to break into the VC space across Africa's many startup ecosystems. How that is done is, especially for this year, we have two programs that are live right now. You can check them out on www.dream-vc.com, where one is oriented towards the junior investor, the individual who wants to work for an African focused investment firm, a VC firm, or who wants to break into the space and wants to learn everything they need to do that, the skills, the ability. And then there's another one that's oriented at the more experienced, mid to late stage career professional who potentially sees themselves a bit more on engaging the VC ecosystem as perhaps the next big angel investor, who wants to become the next big ecosystem builder, who wants to found an accelerator, an incubator, or even launch a VC fund. That's what the Investor Accelerator program that we run is a good fit for. In many ways, there's a lot that can be done in terms of supporting and enabling the investment ecosystem. And DreamVC is very much part of that process of enabling and supporting, right? So we provide these two programs, and we definitely plan to provide more down the line. But these hopefully will be a good way for any individual who wants to engage with the VC space, who wants to learn about the VC space, who wants to work in the VC space, or perhaps who sees themselves as the next Idris Bello or Lua Vieji, for instance, to actively start investing by learning all they need, getting the connections that they need, and getting started with investment.
Wow, 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 that's amazing. And I know all your trading program is going to come on is going to be online. How can the African market, what's your strategy? Are you getting more people on board? Because I see that the African ecosystem need this real awareness about VC, because if you have knowledge about VC, it helps you to be able to make the right decision and even know how to select the kind of investment you need at every stage. And it could also encourage more people to get to participate in this ecosystem. And that's why what you're doing is really, really amazing and is new. And at least you're the first person I'm hearing doing this, a fantastic thing to get, because it's just not about running company. You need to also know how to get other people to participate, and you must know how the ecosystem work. So how can we get more African people to be part of this year program?
I really think it's just a matter of awareness, to be honest, Samuel. Awareness that the VC space culturally is not one that's exclusive to the multimillionaires or the billionaires out there. Awareness that the way that the venture capital system was set up in the first place was to support entrepreneurs, and that right now, entrepreneurs in each of the 54 markets, especially in markets like Nigeria, especially in markets like Ghana, like Kenya, like Uganda, like Tanzania, need that support, and there are loads of them, and they're building insane businesses that really could be fantastic investment opportunities, just as good, if not multi times better than any real estate investment project, just as good as agricultural investments or family owned businesses. And that there is so much value that can be created by investing in founders and supporting founders. You know, our aim is really making that process more transparent, is making that process more accessible, and is about giving people the information they need to get started. So actually, what we've done on the DreamVC side is we've compiled a set of resources for anyone who wants to understand more about the space to get for free just by going to the website and checking out our VC library. And then if they really want to make this part of their career, they want to actually start making investments, or perhaps they want to streamline into a venture capital fund, then definitely make sure to apply to our programs, reach out, ask questions, be shameless. Because if you are shameless and you're curious and you ask, then the answers will come. And then, we can really rebuild and build a much larger private capital ecosystem together.
Wow, wow, wow. That's amazing. Quick ones. Someone want to know, so they want to know what are the parameters that actually determine the evaluation of a company. A lot of people want to know, some people don't know how to to value their company. So what are basic elements that people should look out for in trying to evaluate their startup, and how does it work?
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of conflicting information about this online, mostly because there's a very predetermined way of how you can value a large business, and there are hundreds of ways of how we can value a small business. So, depending on who you may ask for this, my answer might be super obvious, or it might be something that causes a lot of controversy. My position's a bit in the center. If you're an entrepreneur or you're someone trying to value your business, most likely than not, you're not a large business. So something like a discounted cash flow, which looks at your future cash potential, or a multiples analysis, which looks at how other people have done before you, is not a good way to value your business, because you are new. You're new in your market, you're in a new market, you're building something new. In that sense, you can't be valued by what has been done before or by your hypothetical future growth potential. Instead, we should be looking at things that are a combination of tangible and intangible assets that every firm has. Every
Wow.
entrepreneur, if they've put together a team, that team has a certain value. Every entrepreneur, if they're in a particular market, that market understanding has a certain value. Their connections, their former investment, their physical assets, like the factory they might own, the office they might have, all of these things are a combination of physical and intangible assets, and together that makes up the value of a company. Finally, one of the cool things that most people forget is that valuations are very different around the world, and that doesn't mean inherently that a company that's valued 2 times as highly in the UK is 2 times as better as a company that's, for example, valued 2 times less in Nigeria. All this means is that this valuation reflects the price of the assets, tangible and intangible, that this company has in their market at this point in time. The value and the price of employing a software engineer in Lagos is going to be different to the one employing one in, for example, London, or employing one in San Francisco. And that's why a company could have exactly the same assets, but they could cost completely three different things in three different places around the world. So, to any founders and entrepreneurs listening, if you do a valuation and you think that your company is not valued as highly as some huge international peers, that doesn't mean anything. That just means that you're in a market that's expanding, that's growing really fast, and you're growing along with it. And your valuation will grow, and you will grow. And if you build a successful business, look at the flutter waves out there. Is there a cap for them? I don't think so. I think companies can grow and grow and grow, and all of you have the potential to build a fantastic business.
Wow, wow, wow. That's really, really amazing. Thank you so, so much. Another thing I'm looking at is that, a lot of people want to raise money. First of all, I want to tell you what's the best strategy. Is it to work well, just to just go to this Silicon Valley and begin to look for investors? What is the best approach? A lot of companies want to raise money, and maybe first of all, what is the right time to raise money? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Second, how do you think is the right way to approach raising money? Is it basically to be sending cold email to people on all the different platforms, or just gathering an email? What are the best approach on company who want to raise money, who are ready to raise money? What are your recommended approach
Mm-hmm.
as an operator and as a VC? What's the best way to approach raising money? Is it to go to a VC company and begin to poach everyone or talk to everyone, send a cold email or what? So what are the best strategy when somebody want to raise money?
Mm-hmm. A really big, good question, to be honest, there, Samuel. I think a lot of people come to us and ask this kind of thing, and a lot of people come to VCs and ask this kind of questions. And to be honest, my first ever advice is always the same. Think first, do you need to raise money? Everyone always says, this company has raised. You open TechCrunch and you hear 10 companies have raised. You open Global News and you hear 100 companies have raised. And all the time, everyone's talking about someone who's raised money. But what we don't really do is we don't really celebrate day-to-day successes in their own right. So you don't hear about the restaurant business that is making $5 million a month. You don't hear about the giant laundry business that is making $10 million a year. You don't hear about these businesses, but they are perfectly successful in their own right. So my first point would always be, think about whether your business model is one that is a fit for raising external capital. Because sometimes the capital you might need is not necessarily from venture capitalists, it's not necessarily from angel investors or even later stage private equity investors or the international stock exchanges. Sometimes it's a better fit is another source of funding. And arguably the best source of funding you can get is to be bootstrapped, to build a business really from square zero, right? To work from step A to Z and build a business that is sustainable, that is growing your own revenues, that is generating a significant amount of money, and where you control that business entirely. There are many successful businesses that have been built like that. Of course, it's harder than raising external funding, but that's always a possibility. Now, let's imagine you do want to raise. Let's imagine you're thinking, when is the right time to fundraise? Well, arguably, the right time to fundraise, if we're talking about engaging institutional funding, engaging those angels, engaging those investors in the VC side, is when you're prepared for a huge expansion or a huge growth. The way that the VC sector works is that VCs are also businesses. And the way that VCs get money is they get money from someone even larger than them on the assumption that they will find businesses, they will invest in those businesses, and then they will sell their stake in that business and make a huge return. So for a VC to make that huge return, then the startup must make that huge return. So if you want to then approach a venture capitalist or an angel as a startup and say you're fundraising, you need to justify how in perhaps a year's time you'll be 100 times bigger. You'll grow your user base from 1,000 users to 2,000 users. You'll grow your revenues from 5,000 naira to 1 million naira, right? It doesn't matter the scale at which we're talking. At each company's business, it's going to be unique to that company and to the sector and to the nature of that sector. But what's really consistent is that VCs want to see exponential growth because that's what the sector is for. If you want to grow in a standard way, 5%, 10% every year, you can look at banks, you can look at loan agencies, you can look at MFBs. or you could look potentially at some individual high net worths who might give you that capital. But VC is very much there for those that want to build the next Uber, the next Airbnb, the next Google, the next huge business that really needs a lot of capital injected. So the right time is always the one where you're preparing for an expansion strategy, a huge rollout of new products or something really big. As for the right approach, I guess my core thing to say is it is very much still a space that is based a lot on access to information. The venture capital space is inherently asymmetric. Inherently, everyone doesn't get the same opportunities. And it is very much a case of closed networks of people knowing other closed networks of people. So social capital cannot be undervalued. It's an enormous resource in the VC space. Being really proactive, building connections and pushing that goodwill out there can actually really help you down the line. Most founders don't know that to successfully raise, you have to be quite audacious. You have to see who in your network has capital. You have to engage those connections and engage introductions. And that can increase the likelihood of you actually getting a conversion, getting that funding from a VC, sometimes 100 times over. What many founders don't know, they think is you go to a VC fund, you apply online, it might be the same as just contacting them via email or perhaps getting an introduction. But that's three different pipelines for a VC fund. And almost every VC fund out there doesn't consider them equal to each other. Because if someone has already recommended a firm to them, then they need to do less work because they know that this company already has somebody who has looked at it and said, this company looks interesting. That means that they're already more favorably inclined to listen to the company that comes in via recommendation, that comes in via an introduction, rather than one that just comes in via cold email, via direct outreach, or via someone like meeting them randomly on the street and saying like, hey, please listen to my company. Right. So in that sense, connections and network, really, you can't underestimate how powerful these resources can be.
Wow, wow, that's really really amazing. I also want to ask you, because now that we have it in the house, let's take advantage of it properly so that our audience can really benefit from your world of experience and all of that. A lot of people want to invest in Africa. We can see some kind of investment coming to Africa, even though we know it's just a drop in a lot of places. Okay, there's a lot of potential in Africa. There's a lot that still need to happen. What kind of project, startup, business venture that startup people who are trying to build the next billion-dollar company who are trying to do amazing things in Africa? What are the things do you, your own opinion, that you think VC are looking at, the kind of startup that you think VC are looking at the present time? Because
Mm-hmm.
if people are, the ultimate goal is to build a bigger company, sometimes you'll be surprised that even from what the VC want, you can really know what is going to grow, what's going to drive you to the
Mm-hmm.
next level. So, for your own point, by wearing your VC cap right now, not an operator card right now, what will you think at the moment in Africa? What do you think the startup should be building? What they should be looking at?
Mm-hmm.
The area they think they should concentrate on?
I mean, I think very much it's an infrastructure generation. It's a generation where building infrastructure to power other companies comes with almost limitless potential. For example, payments infrastructure. We have had, a generation of international banks that have left the continent in the last 10 years, and domestic banks have been filling those gaps, but there's a lot more that can be done. I'm not just talking about cryptocurrency and blockchain enabled payments. Those two are already different markets that are huge in their own right, but just payment from point A to point B, low transaction payment, access to foreign exchange markets, access to easily exchanging currencies, sending currencies, commercial banking, business banking, payment systems, all of these kind of things are structural. And a lot of companies are trying to solve one of these problems. They're trying to do just foreign exchange from point A to point B, just working with a particular corridor, just making sure that you can pay, for example, for services or pay for utilities. But think about it in a larger space. There needs to be somebody who powers these companies as well. And that's what the Flutter Waves and the Chipper Caches and a couple of other companies have been doing really well. They've realized that there's a huge market in each of these individual channels, but if they can channel and power 1,000 other firms in their own right, who then power 1,000 other firms, that's like a huge opportunity. And that's definitely something that every VC on the continent is keeping an eye on. Beyond that, there are a couple of other sectors that are also equally substantial in terms of powering other sectors. Think about it this way: e-commerce. E-commerce as a marketplace, it's building and powering hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of businesses to sell and buy on one platform. marketplaces. It brings together the entire global world to buy and sell a particular good. For example, the trade finance sector. We have so many physical consumables going in across the continent and being generated and grown and sold, for example, in Nigeria, in Ghana, and other markets, but not that much actually makes it on a cross country level. And providing a tech platform or tech solutions to aggregate that, enormous opportunity. Beyond that, I'm also seeing the similar trend in infrastructure and markets like education, markets that require somebody to do a really, really good job to take that first step. For example, cruise, for example, freight, for example, transport. All of these spaces are still spaces that very largely are not interconnected across the continent and even not interconnected in country, between regions, between cities, at speed and at convenience. So for more business to thrive, there needs to be someone, some startups, some companies out there who are really taking those first steps and building those infrastructure plays. And once someone does that, then 1,000 other startups can grow from that. And obviously, every VC would be super excited about the idea of investing in and powering that enabler who can then enable loads of other companies in their own right. We can talk about other sectors, but those are the ones that really, really come to mind straight away. The finance angle, the infrastructure angle, and the educational angle as well, where powering the educational infrastructure or enabling that is also a huge opportunity in its own right.
Wow, that's it's amazing. Thank you so much. As we're gonna be working a couple of things together. I like what you guys are doing, the way you're trying to create more knowledge to break the gap within the VC ecosystem in Africa. That's really huge. Okay, I think right now we need to open the floor for questioning. We already have one question before. Please check more if there's more questions. Somebody asked that any need for bootstrapping that any need for bootstrapping? We want to contribute that to that. Any need for that?
I think in general, bootstrapping is always the ideal version of building your business. If you can build your business without having any debt obligation, without having any external funders who own a portion of your company, then it's great, right? Who wouldn't want to own 100% of a $1 billion company? If you own 100% of a $1 billion company, you're worth $1 billion. There's no complicated maths involved in that. However, most of the time you won't be able to build a company to that size without certain obstacles. And what happens quite often is that to surpass those obstacles is either a momentous challenge or it's something for which you need resources. And to get access to those resources, that's where the debt economy and that's where the venture capital sector really plugs in, providing you with that critical cash, with those critical connections, with the critical consulting help, with the critical business support, sales support, and everything else to get you from small business through to the next Jumia, or for example, the next InterSwitch, and whatever other big company you might want to build.
Wow. Somebody was asking that they can underestimate the power of networking. That what is the best platform to create the best network?
Honestly, I think it's a very simple answer here, and I think Samuel, you're going to agree with me on this, but it's definitely LinkedIn.
So we'll be
I assure
asking
you,
one more question.
I assure you guys, I
So go
don't
ahead,
have
please.
any bias or any brand ambassadorship for LinkedIn, but it's a fantastic platform. It's a platform where individuals come to share business knowledge. It's a platform where individuals come to enable those connections to happen. It's a platform where business professionals from the entire world are connected, and it's very easy to use. So honestly, if you're not on LinkedIn, I would just say get onto LinkedIn first, and then after that, you can build on top of that with platforms like Twitter for social communication or other large social media outlets as well. But LinkedIn very much is the go-to when it comes to business conversations, professional conversations, partnership discussions, or really building your brand as an individual or an entity. And if you want to get into the VC space, I can guarantee you 99% of the VCs are going to be on Twitter, they're going to be on LinkedIn, and they're going to be actively engaging with each other there. So if you want to plug into those conversations, take the first step.
Wow, thank you so much, Mike. My quick one. What is your last message to Nigerian startup, Nigerian VC, or African startup? Better still, an African VC. What's your message generally for the African startup and African VC or upcoming VC?
hmm Well, I think for any aspiring investor, it would be untoward of me not to mention that, we do have a lot of resources that we make available for free and also on a paid basis at DreamVC that you guys can check out. So I would definitely say have a look at DreamVC and see if this is a good way for you to capitalize on kickstarting your career, on really getting involved in the investment space as someone who wants to join the venture capital world, who wants to invest in venture capital, who wants to learn more about venture capital and more. Beyond that, even outside of DreamVC, for any aspiring investor, I would say this: don't underestimate how much the VC space is interconnected with each other. You never know who knows somebody else. So it's always right to ask and take that first step forward. Because if you take the step to try and grab an opportunity, you never know what will come. For example, if you reach out to Samuel, you never know who Samuel might know. It seems like Samuel knows everyone. But in that sense, there's always a lot of connections in the investor circles and the entrepreneur circles that can really help you start your career or start in making investments. For the startups out there, I would say really just continue to approach the startup
Everybody.
space as one where you're continuously having to work really hard for what you want, because it is a market where you continuously have to grind, but be open to collaboration. Partnerships are always the way forward. Partnerships and collaboration are always the way to engage a larger market, and you don't have to always reinvent the wheel. You can see that beyond just partnering with corporates, there's so many other startups that could be a great partner, a great ally for you to tackle the Nigerian market, to tackle any East African market, to tackle the South African market. So if you want to expand into another market, you want to collaborate, always approach it as a market where you can build in unity rather than building in isolation. And I guarantee you it's going to work in your favor.
Wow, wow, that is really, really amazing, Mike. Thank you so much, Mike. You really spend enough time trying to educate us about VC. I enjoyed, even me, I'm becoming more expert every day talking to you, and we look forward to bringing you more and more to keep talking, because there's enough reason to keep pushing this message out there. We really need to get a lot of people into this the VC world to understand how important it is to the African market and to help them grow to the next, even before they begin to go outside. What can we do for ourselves? And that is what you're doing. We appreciate you so much. I will keep in touch and see how we can take it further. Do have a
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
day, Mike.
Thank
Great
you,
to have
Samuel.
you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
bye.
Bye bye.